Hello, welcome to the 100th episode of Airhacks TV with lots of questions and hopefully answers. So first, breaking news. There's a pro race called TDF 2022. Of course, everyone knows about that. It is from the Mr. Pito Zagan also took place at the race. And of course, we have a member of our Airhacks TV community, and I think he won even the race. So as you can see, he started in the front line, and he won the race. So I'm just waiting, for the confirmation of that. And as you can see, this is the Airhacks racing team. So his name is Jerry. So he also took place at several Airhacks Live and a couple of Airhacks TV, and he also had, I think he asked the very first question. So let's back or go to the question. So hello Brett. You are welcome as always. Still nice memories at the Christmas edition of Airhacks TV at the Munich airport, of course. Yeah. Airborne developer Mark, which is good. So Brett, you should also win a race somewhere in Arizona. Yeah. Okay, so let's start with the show. Before, maybe, this is the 100th episode. So what I asked myself, how it started, and what were the questions at the very first episode, which I was interested. So this was the questions I asked myself. And what I did, I found actually the very first episode. This is the first Airhacks question and answer. And it was at the April the 7th, 2014. And what I really like is what I did back then. So I had here, the questions. So I highlighted the persons, and there was the questions. The problem with this is that now I get more and more, the shortened names from GitHub gists. And back then, and then I asked myself why I did it back then and not now. And what I also remember is what was the initial idea of Airhacks TV. And there were actually two reasons. What I always tell you is that I cannot keep up with answering the answers or the questions via email. And this is partially true. So what's also the reason was I got too many comments on my blog. And the idea was with the Airhacks TV that I will go through the archive of my blog and answer all the comments, and then there will be no more Airhacks TV. And what happened instead that I get more and more questions. So this is why the show runs for over 8 years right now. And what's interesting, most of the questions could be asked today. So it's like 8 years old show. And the questions are still relevant, especially REST and data transfer objects and how to share the models, WDSDL for REST, and actually today we had a chat how to generate Java clients from OpenAPI, and also if you take a look at Entity Manager in Clear, we had a similar question today about transactions. So it's not like very up-to-date questions. So I was curious, so what was actually the second show? And this is the second show. And this was like deploying jars with embedded containers versus wars. We got very similar question today, how to structure the UI. So also, this is like the BCE design project. And Archelian versus Mockito, there is a parallelization. And there is schedule event in only one node in the knee cluster. What I did recently, we implemented event bridge with Lambda, which solved exactly the issue. So I would say it is actually interesting. So the old questions are still up to date. Okay. So now what we should do, maybe take a look at the very first show, and this can take longer because there's all the episodes here. And what's also funny is that I actually remember the older episodes, and especially there was one this was Java 1, but there was one with the Christmas mood from the airport Munich, and this one. And this was the 21st, and I still remember this, and I still remember the picture, and I thought, it was like 2 years ago. And and this one was the very, very first. So this was the first episode of AirHacks TV. So what we could do, we can take a look just how it looks like. Yeah, reject all. And this was the very first episode. So there's roughly 4,000 views, and this is how it looked like. So it was almost identical to right now, which is also funny. So with 100 episodes, I would say roughly 200,000 views, which is less than one cat video, I would say, but still okay for software engineering and software development. Okay, so this was nice memories, and I really enjoy it. So it's a completely different show. I don't have to prepare, or there's this always was uncut. And I think we never missed a month. This is, as I remember, it was always Monday, Tuesday, or Sunday sometimes. Okay, so now back to the show. And where is it? So this is the 100th episode, and this is the pro racer Jerry. And he asked me, I have tried Lambda 17 layer. And this is what I implemented on my GitHub account, and he says he doesn't like the and I like to hear the idea how to reuse the Java 17 layers across multiple CDK deployments. And so what is Lambda layer? Lambda layer is like Docker layer, very similar. So you can have a base libraries, base class path deployed once, and you can base your Lambdas on it. And for Java 17, it is really interesting, because what you can do is the AWS Lambda supports right now Java 11, but with Java 17 layers, you can deploy the JVM once and then use it in production. So you can use Java 17 right now. And this is what I did in the as a proof of concept and deployed to my GitHub account. But I'm using in current project. So we do exactly this in a current project. And we are, of course, waiting to delete it, because in one point of time, Lambda will support Java 17, which is very likely. So, Jerry, what you can do is you can be less lazy than me, and we could actually deploy the Lambda once to S3 and then refer to it. So why I did it this way? Because what I'm actually doing, my Lambda layer implementation is based on Mark Sail's Lambda layer, and Mark is an architect from AWS. So I'm actually cloned his Lambda implementation, and I'm using his layer. So this is not from me; it is from Mark, which is good, because Mark works for AWS, and it's always better, to rely on stuff from the company before you implement it by yourself. And by the way, if you're interested, not in the layer but about Mark, there are several AirHacks FM episodes with Mark, and the next one is also going to be with him, because Mark Sales is also one of the authors of Lambda Power Tools. So, Jerry, so what you can do is, instead of cloning it over and over again, what you can do is you can ship it, deploy it once, and then instead of doing this, you can have layer lookup and point to an already existing layer. So you have one CDK modules which deploys the Lambda layer, and other one which uses the Lambda layer. This what can be. So now, friend of the show, and he also, Jeff Rogers, already attended the AirHacks Live workshop. So thank you for that. And interestingly, the 99th edition of AirHacks TV, for unknown reasons, was all about clouds. So it was just, exclusively about clouds, and this episode less so. So he asked me, I'm using Quarkus to build a backend JAX application that accesses a Postgres database. The JAX is accessed via web client. So and now he asks, could you explain some pro and con of following deployments? Docker, executable jar, and native executable. And of course, Lambda, there will be also another one. So, and Docker Compose, it is not Docker Compose, it will be like container deployment. So, I would say all are equal, right? But it really depends on your target, not server, how to call it, path, or which environment do you have, which server do you have. For instance, if you have your own server, so it really depends. I would say if you can get an EC2 machine very cheaply, go with the executable jar. This is how the executable jar started back then, because we said, okay, we have bare metal and we ship a jar and we can just run the jar directly on the machine. A native executable, and you get the best of, I would say, if your application is running all the time, right now you get the best possible performance with executable jar, but you will need more memory. So native executable, it will save you 80% of RAM. The problem is going to be a little bit slower at runtime because it's not as aggressively optimized as the executable jar. And the startup time is faster, which doesn't matter for service which runs all the time. And and the problem, of course, is you need kind of a pipeline where you build the native image, which will take 5 minutes or more. Now, the Docker is going to be the slowest option of all three, or of two, because it is, it is like, there's some indirection here, and you need also you need environment. You will have to build, the Docker image, but it was the most popular. I would say the Docker option, if you go to Kubernetes, plain Docker, Fargate, or Azure Container Apps, whatever you choose is going to be Docker. So the executable jar is exotic one, and the native makes sense. And there is a question from today which makes absolute sense regarding LightSail. So there's a question about this virtual private hosting, and native executable would make sense then because you can save a lot of memory and you will pay less. Okay. Juf Than, this is the name, ask me, what is your opinion on database schema migration in plain Jakarta EE? So liquid base or Flyway. So I prefer Flyway because it is simpler and easier. And this is also a recurring question. I would say from day one of earhacks, I get the question. Should liquid base be included in the WAR file? So interestingly, if you use Quarkus, it is an extension, for instance. In WAR file, it really depends, because the question is, would you like to migrate all your tables or the database during startup of the application? Then it has to be part of the WAR. What I prefer it to do it outside in the CI/CD pipeline. This is what I would do. I would try to migrate everything outside the application, and if the migration is successful, then deploy the application and run the system test. This is what I would do. And in this particular case, there will be no liquid base inside the WAR. Okay, now there was a question from the Twitters from Douglas, and the cool story is I said to Douglas, hey, you are part of the show, and Douglas said, okay, great, then I will ask a lot of questions, which is the right thing to do. And so now the first question is, in a context where the deployment is layered and the application server is used, is there any significant advantages in having the application built for using only Jakarta EE APIs rather than dependencies that are bundled in the artifact, I think? And he mentioned Spring. So Spring aside, because it's a religious topic, but what is actually the advantage of using just Jakarta APIs only? It means you are actually not using any dependencies in this particular case, because as you already mentioned, the Jakarta API is an API, and the implementation ships with the server. So what means in my case, most of companies I work with, they have some contract with the application server vendor. So if there is some security issues, it is patched by the vendor. And this is, I would say, from the political or management perspective, easier than have one binary blob with no separation, right? And so this is, I would say, this is the advantage. What's also nice is that the I would say if you take a look at the 108 years of Airhacks TV, the cool story is you can actually do it, right? So you can watch my code from the episode in the year 2014 and even earlier from my earliest YouTube sessions. Everything is documented, and compare it with the source code I'm writing right now, and you will see it is almost identical. So the nice story is with the Jakarta APIs, there are no migrations. So you can actually pick, the code from the episode number 1 and run it with minor modification as AWS Lambda, serverless AWS Lambda, which was not available back then. And this is what my clients like. So it is not, I would say, Jakarta is not about, like technological excellence. It's more like, it is good enough, and we just focus on the API and we don't care about the runtimes. So this is what I will say what's really nice about that. And over the years, it was stable. So there are lots of stories like, clients which I met 10 years ago. They asked me about helping them to migrate to a newer technology. And we said, okay, we delete some old J2E stuff, but it will still run on the recent runtime. So this is actually then the nice part of Jakarta API. So I don't know. I would say it is absolute possible to write great Spring apps, right? So I would say if you like Spring, go for it. It's not like, I would say that this is the nice part in Java ecosystem, that you can actually do whatever you like, and you can be successful if you are reasonable, right? So now the question about Quarkus. So how using Quarkus instead of an application server would impact this possible advantage? I mean, considering that Quarkus puts all the required runtimes dependencies in a lib folder, which you can put it into a Docker layer. So Quarkus still separates, and Helidon as well, the implementation from the APIs. So this is the great part. The only difference is there is no deployment, or deployment happens at build time. So but Quarkus can be also very like Spring, because what you can do with Quarkus, you can say I'm ignoring the micro profile and Jakarta EE APIs, and I just focus and I just build the application on proprietary Quarkus APIs, and then there is no advantage, because then you are completely dependent on Quarkus, and you can hope that all the extensions survive, or you can contribute to the extensions. So this is the exactly same thing. But in my project, what we are doing, we are just using the microprofile APIs, which usually are SmallRye APIs on Quarkus. So if Quarkus dies or is no more that sexy, we can still move to Helidon or Micronaut, for instance. Okay, now next question. Spring Native is said to provide key advantages. Is there equivalent solution for applications built using Jakarta only? Of course, Micronaut and Quarkus did it for years, and I think Spring is now right now in the situation where they can also do it. But the interesting part is, I actually forgot to, if you search for Jakarta core profile, and so Jakarta core profile, and part of the core profile is CDI Lite. And this context and dependency injection CDI Lite is meant to run on Java SE and be easily natively compilable to GraalVM. So I would say the Jakarta E core profile is like compatible, I would say, with the Quarkus core set, and it will run on the GraalVM. And it means just then all application servers will run on the GraalVM, not only Quarkus, Helidon, or Micronaut. And I would assume that the Jakarta E core profile is going also to be supported by Micronaut, because Graham Rocher is also working on the CDI Lite, and they are already implementing. Wait a second. They are already implementing the JAX-RS spec and CDI spec and how to call it, the bin validation spec. So they are not far off. So yeah, I don't know whether the question is answered as you fully answered, but I would say so there is equivalent solution. I would say this is called Jakarta EE Core Profile. So if I use Payara as my application server, but I want to use Hibernate instead of Eclipse Link, will I have to deploy Hibernate together with my application? Yes, this is what we did before. I'm not sure whether you could actually replace the Eclipse Link with Hibernate and on the application server level and not on the war level. So what we did it inside a war. But the question is, if you really would like to do this, I would actually ask the Payara guys whether they will support this mix, because this is all about support. And if they support it, I will ask them, what is better, to bundle your war or your Hibernate with your war or with the application server. Okay. Now, the next one, and maybe we take a brief look at the... So we have lots of questions. Yeah. What's here? Michael watched almost all of them. Not bad. Nebraska. Jeff, what's the weather? Is interesting. Already live? Yes, I'm live. Waiting for the master to wake up. I mean, I already wake up, right? Thrown you from time zone exception, but this is not my fault. So, okay, now back to Quarkus. So, how does Quarkus provide to the application the dependencies from the lib folder? First, you cannot say this with the lib folder because Quarkus comes with several possibilities. So, there is like uberjar, fetjar, there's the fastjar, and there is the uberjar, fastjar, and the default one where with the Quarkus app. And what it is not like Quarkus does it. This is what happens on the extension level. So every extension is responsible to separate, the runtime from the deployment, and the extensions are optimizing the bytecode for startup time. So this is what happens in Quarkus level. And if you take a look at the jars in the Quarkus, so it is even crazier. So this is like a very thin startup class, and then there is their core Quarkus, and then the dependencies are loaded, the extensions are loaded, which are highly optimized. It's not like loaded via reflection. It's more like hardwired loaded. So and the magic is not about the separation. The magic is there is no reflection, and the entire bytecode is hard coded. So this is the magic, and Quarkus does it with bytecode generation, and Micronote also with bytecode generation, but is driven by annotation processors, for instance, right? So next is, which application server do you recommend? So I use Payara a lot. Jabo is still great, and OpenLiberty. This would be the my favorites. There's a new kids on the block like Piranha Cloud. Payara Cloud is also interesting. It's not application server. It's like a serverless variant. It's called Payara Cloud. Piranha Cloud. Cumulus EE, also nice. It really depends, which I would say with which larger software suppliers is your client working with. If this is a Red Hat shop, I would advise to use Quarkus or JBoss. If this is an IBM shop, which is of course Red Hat, but OpenLiberty would be the one. The old Sun clients usually use Payara because Payara is actually Glassfish. And there are also newer servers like Payara gets some competition with So Glassfish, there will be a spin-off of Glassfish, which also will come with commercial support. So I would say I don't care about this, and I don't like to discuss a lot with my clients. We pick whatever. So right now we use Quarkus, but for us, we always say if Quarkus will die, we'll move to Helidon or Micronaut. So this is not like we are religiously following one vendor. Now, Mr. AutoHandle, and I'm really glad that Mr. AutoHandle asked the question, because I tracked this guy down, and why? How is possible, right? Because this is the URI, and I remembered the URI, and this is what I remember, just a picture. And I think 5 years ago, Mr. AutoHandle attended the AirHacks workshops in Munich, and we had a nice chat. And this is because I just you remember the picture, and the funny story is, so we have to have a chat, Mr. AutoHandle, because you attended the workshops in Munich, and we had a chat at lunch, and you told me, you know what, I would like to have 1 hour session with the attendees, and I will explain to you machine learning. And I said, really? Yeah, then go ahead. And what I remember, after the lunch, you just started to explain my attendees, which was Java EE workshop, machine learning back then. And then you wrote back some emails, and because I was about to travel to San Francisco to the Java one, and you suggested me, where I can see, I think, dolphins, right, from the shore. So thank you for attending, and nice memories with you. Okay, this was the Mr. AutoHandle, and this is a mysterious guy. So we should know. Interesting. Why? I still don't know why you attended actually the AirHacks workshops in Munich, just to tell my attendees about machine learning. So it's interesting story. Then Mr. Piotr Glitzniewicz asked me, do you have any recommendation, rule of thumb on where to check roles privileges declaratively? Like where to pick like Spring Secured or the JAX-REST annotations. And I would say in the cloud era, what happens more and more, that some such security annotations are part of the API gateway or load balancer or service mesh or whatever you have before. So I would say usually what you do with such annotations, you are just checking whether the user is authenticated. And if the user is authorized to do something else, this usually happens inside the source code, your code, and because what you have the user, you have the group or the role of the user, and you deciding whether someone is able to call a method or not. So yeah, this is the difference. So I would say the static security is declarative, and if there is something more sophisticated, it happens inside the code, and this is always that, right? So Mr. Jeff Rogers again. My Quarkus app is running in JVM mode, consumes about 200 megs and less than 1 CPU. In native mode, consumes 80 megs and less than 1 CPU. When I inspect them in Activity Monitor. So some online providers offers VM size like Nano Micro with a quarter of a CPU and half CPU, 512 megs or 1 gigabyte. Would using Activity Monitor to be a good test of what VM size to select? What is considered is not the JVM size. What's considered is the entire VM size. So what I will do in your case, I will pick a provider and they have free tier and just try it out. This is the cheapest possible solution. So and it is not, the CPU is not a problem. The problem is always memory. Usually you can buy a combination of CPU and memory. You cannot just say, I would like to have 4 CPUs and half a gig of RAM. This is usually not how it works. So there is a mix between the CPU and the RAM. Okay, now Jerry again. This is our racer. And what he found out, and he's absolutely right, that Lambda behind the application load balancer throws, not throws, the content type is application octet stream. Also, this is text plain on the Lambda level. Why it is the case? And the answer is because I forgot to configure the multi-value header. This is the name of the thing, multi-valued header. If you go to the load balancer and click on target group attributes, and there is multi-valued header. If you enable this, you will immediately see the content type. I actually prepared that and forgot to open the browser. But I don't think this setting is available with the higher level constructs in CDK. You will have to use, I think, the CFN construct to do it from the CDK, or just there's one SDK call or one checkbox under the attributes of the target group. So go to the load balancer, listener, target group, and then attributes and multi-value header. If you check it, then the application load balancer will expose the content type from AWS Lambda. So thank you for the investigation. Now, friend of the show, Hans-Georg Glöckler, he also working with web components, but his research was not that great because his question here was answered in 2019 already with a video and the blog post. And what I think is, I even implemented it with your colleagues, because he hired me to help them with web components. With your great developers, we implemented inside the router. So I think our router already uses this, what I showed in the video. So long answer short, there is an ECMA standard, and there's the import function. And with the import function, you can dynamically import parts of the web components application. And this is already answered. Or if you search for dynamic imports with JavaScript and my name, and this is a function like import, and this is the import function. So there is a standard, Mr. Haglu. Thank you for asking. Okay, and if you go to the code, as I remember, we implemented it last year or 2 years ago, and you search for the router, I think inside the router, there is an example of the import. So, Mr. Wanderer 2097, and congrats. So thank you for watching. And there's here, so Mr. Wanderer asked me, you mentioned on several occasions that cloud is like an exploded application server. Do you think the same is also true for the cloud native databases? Yes. Do you have any experience using Amazon DynamoDB transaction? Yes. Like here, no idea. Let's see. Hopefully it is a nice blog post. What is it? So I don't have the time to read this right now, but I can imagine what it is. Have you used them in any of your projects requiring stronger consistency guarantee that you wouldn't bother? You have absolutely to bother, and how DynamoDB transactions are working is fairly simple. As by the way, the DynamoDB model is what we also always used in the AirHex workshops in Munich Airport, because we had also NoSQL shows, how Cassandra works, and we always picked, the DynamoDB model, because there was some paper from Amazon about DynamoDB NoSQL databases, and lots of databases are based on this paper. But DynamoDB itself, the recent implementation is not the exact implementation of the DynamoDB paper. But back to you, how DynamoDB works. So there is a standard way of interacting with DynamoDB, and this is eventual consistent. And it is cheaper. It is half the price usually. So there is a read capacity unit and write capacity unit, and I think you can read 4K and write 1K and this is 4K read with eventual consistency, or you will pay one RCU, or you will have to use two RCUs for the same with transactions. Writing is the same. If you're writing 1 kilobyte, there is one WCU, writing capacity unit. You would need two for transactions. So, and if you are, so transactions are not supported everywhere in DynamoDB. If you're using GSI, which stands for Global Index, I forgot the SI. So it's like a global index. So the strong transactions or the strong consistency model is not working. But what happens behind the scenes is if you are writing without transactions, it happens asynchronously. So what can happen is that if you are reading, you are not seeing the, your own data. And if you're writing, then it will write to more nodes, and this is more expensive, and this costs more money, and is slower, also slower, and it can even happen. Even errors can happen, 500s, because on network outage you get exceptions. So I would say it's not like don't bother if you don't need transactions, don't use them, because it is cheaper and less errors can happen. But you have to live with the with the inconsistency. So you have to know what you are doing. If you're using transactions everywhere, it is slower, more expensive, the latency is higher. You can you get more errors. You can potentially get more errors, but you have consistency assurance, right? So I would say, so we are using both actually with DynamoDB. And now the question is why I'm using DynamoDB at all, right? Because you could say, okay, I always was against NoSQL. I always told use Postgres databases or Postgres databases, relational databases. And the question is, who is in charge of administering the database, right? If I have the choice and I don't have to care about the costs, and I don't have to care about the setup and availability, I will pick a SQL database because it's nicer to use. But if I have to set up everything, then I would pick DynamoDB because there's nothing to set up. It's exactly the same answer if you get Kafka or Kinesis, let's say. So I would pick Kinesis on AWS because there's nothing to set up. In 1 second, I get the topic and I'm ready to go. And Kafka, at least I will have to wait 20 minutes, and I have to either pre-choose the servers and care about the backup, or I will use the serverless mode, which is more expensive. So I would say if I in the cloud already, I always try to pick a proprietary managed service over an open source managed solution. Because if I'm already in the cloud, I don't even try, to be independent from the cloud because I'm already in the cloud, right? So it's a completely different philosophy. And why DynamoDB is nice? Because not like, the programming model is great, not at all. But if I'm in charge of setting up everything, the DynamoDB, there is no setup. I don't have VPCs, no subnets, no AZs, no. I have an endpoint. This is true, gateway endpoint. But there is no, I don't have to care about like explicit backup strategies. I can have a snapshot point-in-time recovery, but it's not like I have to think about replicas and stuff like that, right? So yeah. GSI is Global Secondary Index. This is the name, Global Secondary Index. Okay, so I would start without transactions, and then if you have always to, you have to think, what happens if we access the same table in read and write mode at the same time? Can something happen or not, right? So this is where you need some consistency assurance. So the last question. One of the recent episodes you mentioned using caches, JPL2 in serverless. Lambda deployment makes no sense. How about accessing static data? Yeah, I mean, so right now we, for instance, use S3, and the S3 is consistently fast and lives in Frankfurt with 20 to 30 milliseconds access time. The DynamoDB is faster than S3, so you can access in a few milliseconds your data. And if you use DAX, which is DAX stands for I think DynamoDB accelerated. This is DAX, like the German DAX, right? So you get microsecond latency. So the question is, do you need, this speed? If you need the speed, go for it. So I would prefer DAX for DynamoDB and Elastic Cache for other databases, but I wouldn't implement my own cache in the cloud, right? So this is the answer. So unbelievable. We are done with 100 episodes, and worried about Adam. Why this? So now, almost end of the show. So what also happens, announcement, almost forgot about that. So I get lots of questions about persistence even now. And the December the 8th, we will discuss the entire persistence, especially, the DynamoDB and Kinesis. And in serverless persistence, event-driven. Event-driven is about events. So this is SQS, SNS, event bridging Kinesis, but events with persistence, right? Event sourcing. This is the focus. So it's like, single source of truth is not necessarily in the database rather than in event stores. So this is really hard to name it. So because we had similar workshop last year, and this was more about, event-driven Lambdas. And now I will focus a little bit more on events itself. And the next workshop is about the databases and persistence like DynamoDB, Athena, and querying. And so there will be 2 workshops this year, but it will end of year, and I'm not sure whether I will manage to offer another workshop because it's crazy. So there is a lot to do, lots of project going on. So this was the announcement. And someone asked me about the LightSail. And LightSail is really, Amazon LightSail, really interesting because you can buy very cheaply the virtual private server. It starts with $3 a month. And if you take a look at the options, so we have like $3.50 US a month, and you get 512 megs of memory and 1 core processor. And this should be more than enough to run Quarkus on it. And if you spend $5 a month, you get 1 gig of memory, which is almost too much for a Java EE application on Quarkus, and 1 core. As you can see, there's always 1 core, and you get buy more memory, and with 4 gig of RAM, you get 2 cores. So it is not. I think it's not. No, it's not. It's impossible to have 2 cores with 1 gig. So it is almost always you are buying cores with RAM. So in the clouds, usually RAM is not an issue. If you would like, this 512 can be tough with Quarkus, I would say, because this entire thing. So this could make sense to use GraalVM image, for instance, on it, right? Because with GraalVM, you can save a lot of memory, and you have with $4 a month, you can run Quarkus. Okay, so I think we are ready for the next 100 episodes. And the last thing is what happens at the podcast front. An interesting interview with Jack Franklin, because what turned out that the dev tools, which is fairly complex in Chrome, are built with web components only, and lit-HTML is exactly the same architecture I'm using in enterprise projects. So this was actually a really nice chat with Mr. Jack Franklin. He also knows a little bit Java, and the last episode is also interesting, about convention of a configuration and Maven. So what I don't like about Maven is if there is no configuration, Maven doesn't pick, the recent plugin versions. And this was an interesting discussion with Karl-Heinz, which is a Maven committer, why it is like it is. Okay, now we covered, I hope, everything. And exactly. So I would say thank you for watching. and enjoy the next 100 episodes. And we will do the next wrap up in 8 years. So everyone is going to be younger. And I think we get, Java 26 or something like this, right? So long. Thank you. And see you next time. And bye.